Welcome to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds, in under 30 ways to analyze and discuss how to analyze and discuss Underworlds. Today I'm your host, Phil, and joining me, my two analysts in the Underworlds. We have Skyler. How you doing, Skyler?
I am doing well. That is Spinefin over there giving me weird looks, saying that I should not go into depth on my analytics at this time. I might get toxined.
Fair, Spinefin. And Brian. How are you doing, Brian?
What's up? Doing well.
Good. So we are here today on July the 28th, closing in rapidly on our Q3 tournament event. If you are anywhere nearby, or even if you're not nearby, but you're willing to travel to come and try and take that ticket to Worlds, please come join us August 17th at Noble Knight Games. Event is on our website for if you need more details, but we are getting pretty excited, but it is coming so fast, and it is feeling like it's going to be here before we know it. In terms of topic, today we are going to discuss the meta, but we're not going to discuss how these warbands slot in and like, ooh, which one's the best and which, like a tier list kind of thing. We are just going to say, here's what we've been seeing generally. Here's how we've been feeling about it. Have we been having fun playing in the Wintermaw?
Yeah, it's been really interesting with like Age of Sigmar 4th edition. There's been kind of a lull in content, but we've really been able to breathe in this meta. So we wanted to talk about that.
Absolutely. Get lots of time to sort of dig in, experiment. There was it feels like a long time ago now, but we had so much stuff come out in the spring.
Yeah. That we kind of created our own problem, didn't we?
Now that we've had time to breathe about it and think about it, it feels like it's the appropriate time to start talking about like, how did things shake out? What does it look like? But before we really dig into that, we have our usual segments. So community shout outs. I will just say very quickly, if you are hearing this and thinking, oh man, I really would have preferred that you did a tier list and talked about where all the different warbands sit in the meta, there are plenty of other tier lists online, and if you're interested in a podcast that's talking about them, Path to Glory just finished their extensive warband rankings series, which they even joke about how as soon as we get another release, all of those episodes will probably be somewhat invalidated, which is the fun part about doing tier lists. They're never ending. But if that's something that you're really interested in, you can go check out their stuff. And like I said, plenty of other stuff online. But
I think I will have a hard time resisting referencing it during the episode. At least here and there. I think it's really fun, and I think they did a really good job with it. The thing I like the most is how they graded. Like if you vaguely say, there's S tier, A tier, B tier. What does that really mean? And I think they did a good job justifying. Here's why we think these warbands fall into these tiers. It's a great read. I'd say there's a lot you'll find yourself agreeing with, and I think everyone will pick out things and be like, hey, wait a minute.
I could quibble about this.
Yeah.
Let me go and argue my point. But that's the fun part about the hot take tier lists, right? You get everybody talking. So
community interaction.
Yeah, not our thing, but fun nonetheless. But boys, you got any other community shout outs you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. So the last episode on the cast was with Jake, who recently was a TO for the Goonhammer Open, his first time TOing. Definitely check out our episode on that. It serves both as an episode where we get to know Jake and have him on as a guest, but also part of our beginner series in like how to run an event, how to prepare for a tournament are the last couple episodes that we've hammered out here. But the reason I'm highlighting Jake today is not because of his guest spot on our show, but because his first article is out on the Goonhammer website, also covering the topic of TOing, and it's a great read. I recommend checking it out. I think it does. It serves well as a more concise companion than the 2.5 hour episode that we ended up releasing. Not that I don't think that that's of value, but you can read it a lot faster than 2.5 hours.
Yeah. Well, great. That sounds like a good read. I know I saw it was out, but I have not had a chance to look yet. Very cool. I'm very glad to see Jake getting that platform.
Me too. Looking forward to reading more from him.
Brian, anything that you've got to shout out?
Yeah, so this is more of a functional thing for the community as we organize events. GW has partnered with the ITC, and now they've taken over the ITC going forward. We still haven't seen much on that front in terms of what they truly envisioned for that to change. I think they reiterated at their announcement that they wanted to do no harm, and so I think they're taking that very seriously, and they're making sure that they don't implement any change that is going to be a detractor. So currently they are still asking for people to go ahead and submit your events to their ITC rankings. Basically, you can earn points with your hobby score as like your paint judging and your army, etc. display, whether this is Underworlds or any other game systems. Hobby score and performance in tournaments. So if you are a TO and you want to give your players that opportunity to earn those points and get ranked, because the ITC does do an annual ranking of best in this army, best in this faction, etc., you can make your event registered with the ITC, earn those points for your players, or your players will earn points and it will be represented and get a bit more prominence to your event, elevate it to even more representation and show up in more places. So any and all questions for that, they direct you to itcto@gwplc.com for their email to ask any sort of questions. Just start there. But I recently did this experience myself and give you a little bit more guidance on how that actually works out. If you're organizing an event, like you might have just listened to our organizing an event episode, a lot of times you use Best Coast Pairings. It's just a tournament organizer tool to help you with on the day and to promote your event as well. If you register your event with Best Coast Pairings, you'll actually have an event page, and that helps to share the link out. But once you have that event page, then you can register that event for ITC points. So you would go to Best Coast Pairings and log in as an organizer. You go to the Organize tab. You go to Circuit Tokens. Basically, you're asking the ITC and GW to be granted tokens, basically just registering your event for ITC tournament points and then ITC hobby points. You can submit your event for both of those, as long as you have like a hobby aspect to it, which if you're playing a GW game, you do. So go ahead and sign up for both of those. At least in North America, there was also an option for ITC OCC, but that's like Oceania. So like Australia and the islands down there in the Pacific. Don't sign up for that if you're not in that area. So just wanted to make sure that people weren't submitting that and not knowing what that was. I didn't know what it was.
Fair.
And then once you submit those, they will go to GW for approval process. They'll check your event, basically your event page and whatever you submitted, and then you'd be granted. It's super easy. It sounds a bit roundabout initially, but it's just like 5 or 6 clicks. Once you have your event page set up, 5 or 6 clicks and you're good to go, and it should be granted. And then when your tournament goes and it performs, it should be automatic. All of the tournament performance and the data that you input during your event will then go to ITC points, and your players will then have international ranking points. And we'll see what happens with that for GW. But it's cool. And I did this for our Q3 event. So our Q3 event will have international ITC points ranked.
Very nice. Yeah. It'll be really interesting to see what GW does with that. But obviously, we'll have to probably be waiting a while, I would guess, because GW's got a bit of a backlog, it feels like right now.
Phil, everything's on hold because of Age of Sigmar Season
Yeah,
4 right now.
everything, literally everything. Which is
I know
fine,
I know that was a bit wordy, step-by-step guide. You can re-listen to it if you want, but I also intend to reach out to the Battle Mallet guys because this goes hand in hand with their tournament organizer document. I want to help those guys out, add a segment with step-by-steps guide for signing up their event.
I think that's the perfect place for that.
It would be very, very helpful, I'm sure. Very cool. Any final community shout outs before we jump in here?
Very minor one, but an important one. Even with the little doldrum of content due to Age of Sigmar 4th Edition, the sky is not falling. I don't think that the event is that Underworlds is in any jeopardy. I just see a lot of chatter because we nerds are anxious bunch, and I just wanted to put out there, we don't have any more information than you do, but the consensus that I'm seeing, because I also live in different GW spaces and podcasts, the consensus is GW's been cranking out a lot of stuff, and they've been probably wanting to slow their roll a little bit because it's been a lot to keep up with. And I think that's probably for the best. But right now we just don't have a lot of transparency on that.
Yeah.
And that's causing nervousness.
Yeah. Not to try and get too far off topic here, but GW is a large company that's sort of built as a small company, if that makes sense. So they have some scalability problems, I feel like. But anyway, like I said, don't need to get off onto a tangent, but it is interesting how they are structured. All right, so we today are going to be talking about the Wintermaw meta and what that means. So what is a meta? How do we, what are we talking about? I think lots of veteran players have a understanding of this concept of, well, this is the meta. But like, if you're new to this game or you're new to gaming maybe in general and you haven't really heard this term before, what is a meta? What would you say, guys?
Yeah, I'm totally gonna look this up here in a moment, but before I do, I'm gonna take a stab at it. I'm curious how the internet defines it, because how
it's Deadpool, right?
Oh, sure,
yeah, there you go. Well, that's a different context, right?
Yeah,
but also
I know.
A good usage. But a meta within a game relates to what currently sees prevalency, and usually because there's a power level associated with it. So, kind of like, hey, here's what we anticipate seeing because there's been a pattern of seeing that at this point in time. So like if I were to go to an event and I wanted to play counter meta, which is something I really enjoy, like considering and potentially doing in an event, is you kind of think to yourself, like, what do I expect to see? Because what have we been seeing?
Right.
And so you think like, I'm just going to throw Hungry and Parasite out there because as we dive deeper into this, I'd say that is a very popular deck right now. So when I think about the meta, I think about how do I compete against Hungry and Parasite?
Yeah, for sure. I would agree. I think that is pretty much how I would define it. It's sort of like the combination of what's good, what's being played a lot, and then like what could fit against what's good. So you kind of get that triangle, right? It's like, what are people playing a lot? What are people playing that's good? What can you play to counter the things that are good and popular? And you start to get a feel for that. But I think it's also important to mention metas are not universal. There's like, because we don't all play online and we all don't play against each other all the time. Although if you play on Vassal, you maybe feel a little bit like what like the world meta might be. Like different things grow up in different pockets, and like it's very interesting to see that like some places of the world are like, oh, this stuff's really good, and other places would be like, nobody plays that where I play. Like that's not very good at all. So just keep that in mind. Like we are talking in our perspective about what we are seeing, and what we are like seeing other people report online, but you may have a different experience, and that is totally normal and totally okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because it's kind of like the game's ecosystem and what sort of variations of warbands and decks appear, and that can be localized. Like you could have a local ecosystem where you
Yeah.
don't get a bunch of stuff from international or European metas, but then they all converge into worlds, and that's what makes worlds really vibrant, really
Yeah.
interesting clashing of ideas and clashing of metas.
yeah, I love in the context of a game like this where you have a local meta, right? And then you have the bigger coming together, where like Worlds, like you said, sees the melding of those ideas, but also um, what I have here is another shot at defining it from UNSW Student Life. Uh, uh, so it says. Um, in essence, a meta in gaming terminology is a generally agreed upon strategy by the community. Said strategy is considered to be the most optimal way to win, has the best performance at a specific task. Some people have defined meta as a backronym, meaning most effective tactics available, which I also think is kind of interesting there.
Yeah. It's similar to what we said,
Yes.
essentially. It just
Yeah.
sounds smarter that way. So I think that sets the stage fairly well. Don't need to spend a ton of time defining it, but just wanted to make sure that we weren't, you know, setting the stage with jargon and then not defining anything, because sometimes as new players come into things, they maybe don't know what these words mean. And I think it's good to ensure everyone is on the same page. So if we can rewind time, jump in our Wayback Machine, and go back to early spring of 2024, we had a preview of this new box Wintermaw, and we just got Rhymelocked Relics right before. Like, it was barely out, and uh, we had a new box coming along as well. And I think at that point we also knew we were going to be getting the refresh of the season 1 and 2 warbands. So we knew there was a lot going to be changing. When you guys got your first look at these things, what were you thinking was going to be this meta? What was going to change? What was it going to shake up? How was it going to look? Was it going to be healthy? Was it going to be toxic? What was going on there? Skyler, how about you start?
Yeah, so when we're sitting down to do all the reviews and, kind of like getting that first impression, I felt at the time like Brother and the Bolt was going to be more prevalent than they've been in my life, for sure. Both like uh, in who I expected to see at the like across the table, as well as in my own hands. I'll be the first to admit that I've only tried them maybe 4 times total so far, and man, have they been stumbly, non-confident building goes at playing them, which is weird. I think it goes to show just how much was injected into the game all at once, because and like how much we have to play with right now. Because I think if they had released on their own, I would, or even just with Skinnerkin, and like that's what we have injected into the meta all at once, I would be playing them and trying to figure them out, because at the time I felt quite smitten by them. However, I've been more smitten by the universal decks that came out, like playing with Rhymelocked Relics and Hungering Parasite. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there. So what I'll add before I pass the microphone is I expected to see less Skinnerkin than I've seen. I expected Rhymeworm's Bite to be the bane of my existence, and I was hyped for Rhymelocked, so that's stacked up. That feels good. And Hungering Parasite kind of felt um, like a single fighter aggro take on Void Curse Thralls.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I was. How about you two?
I definitely thought that Rhymeworm's Bite was going to be the cancer of the game, and I thought it was just going to be negative player experience out the wazoo, wrecking faces at tournaments, and making everybody just want to quit the game. I
No,
was
really?
I was severely concerned. I very much thought that it was just a ping Gatling gun and just ping, 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 and I kept my I kept those thoughts internally. I didn't doomsday any of it. That's a total lie.
It's like, I remember things a little differently.
Yeah, no, I thought that the sky was falling. I kind of fell for that because we've been the past couple seasons. There's been these like rise or spikes in ping, and everybody's just like, more ping, more ping. And then this came out, and I thought it was just a belligerent amount of ping. And I don't think it is that, but it's different. It's not a Gatling gun. It's like the floor is lava, and you're playing Twister.
Yeah,
So
you can study the deck, right? You can actually.
Yeah, there is a lot more counterplay, and I think more importantly is, so sorry, we're hold on, I'm getting way ahead of myself.
We will talk about that. Is exciting. We will get there. But yeah.
Yes, so I thought Rhymeworm's Bite was just going to be negative player experience and winning tournaments, and then I thought the rest of the deck was I thought that Hungering Parasite was very interesting. I kind of thought that it might be like Void Curse, as Davey was like, read this like 5 or 6 times.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this seems really heady. I was a little put off by like the Brethren of the Bolt and Skinnerkin. I'm like, for a core box?
Yeah.
But I have been thrilled to see Skinnerkin holding their own, and despite theoretically being like understated by recent releases comparison, but they have completely surprised me in every way. Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah,
again.
I know, it's so hard. It's so hard. But no, it's good. I guess I was probably closer to where Skyler was than where you were, Brian. I thought that the new warbands looked interesting, but I also, looking at them on paper, thought these don't look like they'll be able to compete. We're looking at like maybe C tier warbands, and maybe like Brethren, because of their weird long range shenanigans, will just get away with a whole bunch of strange stuff that you normally can't do in the game.
I was excited by that mechanic. I was like, this is interesting.
It's different. I don't actually think I've played against them yet. And I have not played them, and I probably will never will, because I don't like them. I don't like their aesthetic. Like, it is just very off-putting to me. But so I thought though they both looked fine, but nothing amazing. And the 2 new decks, and then Rhymelock, which I felt I was really hoping for a lot of support for hold, because we were very lacking. Paths of Prophecy hadn't really injected enough hold into the game to make it prevalent. You saw it here and there, but it was pretty sparse. And so I was like, oh, we finally have this deck that's like all about hold. And then it was like, oh, it's half aggro. We're not going to get any hold. And I was a little disappointed by the deck. And then along with those, we then had these 2 very weird decks where it was like, oh, giant ping ball, weird aggro thing. And then who knows, like Hungering Parasite, when we first read it, I was like, this could either be extremely fringe and only picked up by a couple different warbands, or it could be something that we see everywhere, and like it's just sort of generically just doing weird non like interactive shenanigans. And it's like, oh, okay, I don't know. It seemed fine when I saw it on paper, but I was like, I don't know what anybody's going to do with this. And so I thought for sure, like, oh, we're just going to keep seeing Ephelum and Domatan. Like, nothing's really going to change. I think maybe the FAQs added some of the shift there, but either way, I didn't think that the new releases were going to be a big shakeup. But as we really wanted to get to, let's talk about what actually happened. What is our expectation? Like, did the things we expect to happen? Uh, Brian, you were so excited. How about how about you talk through what happened, what didn't happen, from your expectations to now reality?
Yeah, I'll give my closing thoughts as I already started. No, Rhymeworm's Bite is not the tournament sweeping cancer that I thought it was going to be. I still don't like it philosophically from a deck standpoint, but I've been really most interested to see how many different and like different in age of release warbands have been able to take advantage of it and been able to come back into in vogue again. And that's really cool to see. It's cool to see so many of these decks getting experimented with the same warbands, with very, very different warbands. That's all very cool to see. It is kind of interesting in the sense of floor is lava type ping, and you can study the deck and you can counter and not play that. Or you can not play with it. You just make it easier for yourself by counterplaying and not making it as easy for the person to make more lava.
Yeah.
And then Brethren of the Bolt, unfortunately, I haven't played as them or against them. I agree, they're not my thing either. Like zealoting, teaming masses of fanatical freaks is not my shtick. Mainly just order isn't. But they are interesting. I'm already concocting ideas of painting them sort of like the sparrows from Game of Thrones, like the church's army. If I ever get around to that, but yeah, I do want to see more of that. I'm curious.
I do too. I'll help you out with that. I
Cool.
can sit across the table.
I should at least try one game with them and as them, or against them and with them. But yeah, life's been busy, but it's my favorite part right now is, even though we're, some people freak out like we don't have a roadmap right now, but it's really new and novel to be able to get this amount of time to live and breathe in a meta. A lot of times the releases just keep coming and people will be like, the Adepticon meta versus the Nova meta versus the LVO meta, even just LVO being in January and Adepticon being in March, are totally different metas depending on the release dates. And it's really novel to be able to live and breathe in a meta before things switch up.
Yeah, and if you give metas enough time too, they can take different shapes and shift. So you can see, major tournaments kind of come up, and then people go, oh, that's what, is being played at tournaments. And then they kind of take those into their locals, and then people figure out ways to fight against those. And then we see, different things coming to the next tournament. And that's normally hastened by injections of new universal decks, especially, but maybe new warbands as well. Whereas, when you let it sit and breathe like this, you kind of get to see that happen, and that's really cool.
Yeah, you get to actually like dig deeper into the like cards, and you start to find like, oh, there's different strategies to try here, and then you're playing that, I'll try and build something to counter it. And I think naturally new stuff makes it harder to like do any of that. And so in some ways it's like, oh well, the new stuff counters the old stuff, not because like it actually plays in a way that counters it, but that it's just an experience thing. So yeah, I agree. Having it sit like this has been really nice. I will say, and I think it's probably worth a little more discussion, we have seen a ton of people using Hexbane's or Hungering Parasite. Sorry, getting ahead of my mouth's getting ahead of my brain.
Yeah, yes to both there.
we have seen a lot of Hexbanes, but that's not what I wanted to say. Hungering Parasite and still quite a lot of Rhymeworm's Bite as well. I think we all said we didn't exactly expect to see that, and I'm wondering now that we're have had time to play with it, play against it. God knows we played a lot against it. Um, do we think, like, what's the reason for it? Why do you think these two decks are just everywhere? I guess personally, I've been thinking about how like neither of the game plans in those decks are like really like prescriptive, if that makes sense. So like take Malevolent Masks for instance. That deck is kind of telling you like, I need you to do this thing, because if you don't, the deck will not work. Like you have to get masks out, you have to be able to do some holding, you have
Yeah.
to like, it's sort of like, here's step A, here's step B, here's step C, this is how the deck plays, you need to have a warband that works with this. Whereas I feel like both Hungering Parasite and Rhymeworms are kind of like, here's a toolbox, whatever problem you see that you have, whatever, like, if you're coming up against a nail or a screw, like just grab the right tool for the job and go to town. I don't know. Is that how you guys have been seeing it?
So my hot take, and this is just off the cuff, is that some of the decks that we've seen, and I think the really successful decks in terms of popularity, just whether people like them or not, is they have an aspect like Rhyme Locked, like Void Cursed, like Hungering Parasite, where you can really lean into the tech of the deck, but you don't necessarily have to. There are warbands that have strong faction decks, and they can pick and choose bits and pieces from it. Kind of like also Breakneck Slaughter. Great example there, where you can make use of the great cards that are in there and pair them with your strong faction deck. You can go even a step further and lean even more into the momentum and impetus mechanic of Breakneck Slaughter. And so there's another level of depth to the deck, into its own mechanics. Like Void Curse Thralls, how much do you want to lean into actually infecting the other warbands or the table? And also with Malevolent Mask, I do think there is definitely a air quotes tax of you need to bring X amount of mask tech in order to make any of it work. And while I think that deck rides a fine line and a good line in terms of making a dependent mechanic still an interesting deck, I think those other decks that I mentioned have this second layer of depth that really people can experiment more with. They can play like, okay, I want to do Hexbane Hunters with Void Curse Thralls, and then it's like, let's go a little deeper. Okay, no, pull back, or find their own level of comfortability with the deck, and then they go, but I really should try Hexbanes and also Breakneck Slaughter, and then again the same thing, and you have this. It's a really deep meta in the sense that like there's so many options, so many choice, and even within a pairing you have so much depth to explore, and I think that's what makes this current meta really vibrant and really enjoyable.
So I'm gonna jump in with the two things that you both said that I agree with, and you have me thinking about. So Hungering Parasite and Rhymeworms, they don't come with tax, like Brian's saying. Like even Rhyme Locked Relics comes with tax, right?
Yep.
And then saying they're non-prescriptive, I have to agree wholeheartly. I have Hungering Parasite up in front of me now, pulled it up as soon as you started speaking to that aspect of it. Kind of feeling like a universal toolkit, and it really does. There's 3 surges in here that are like easy to just pick out and put in for most warbands. So like I think and relatively like good end phase options that kind of have like a swath of functionality, and so you can come in here, grab what you need from an objective standpoint. It can meet a lot of objective decks midway,
Mm-hmm.
instead of like taking over or not having much to offer. So it can meet your objective deck partway and then give you all sorts of different cool tools that are just universally good. And I think Rhymeworm's Bite feels very similarly too, in that sense. Like the only tax that exists there is domains. And sure, those decks exist, but you don't have to go that route. There's only a couple cards in there that care like really strongly about that route, and so you can forgo it kind of almost like what we saw with Daring Delvers, right? Like exploration
Sure.
mechanic was there, but you could forgo it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that does speak a lot to the prevalency here.
I have a brief bit to jump off with the Rhymeworm's Bite. The other aspect of Rhymeworm's Bite, and I think this applies to other decks as well, is you're noticing some of the decks are actually balanced with a card sequence requirement almost. I don't know how to phrase this. Maybe you guys can help, but in the way that aggro can be heavily dice dependent, I think some of these decks also are balanced by making it deck sequence dependent. I think one of the reasons why Rhymeworm's Bite hasn't been sweeping tournaments or more obnoxious, in my view, is that sometimes the card sequence can come off and it can be as obnoxious and what I dislike about it as I feared. But many times I also see it due to the sequencing clunk up and not perform well because it's its own chance. Like how aggro can be dependent on the dice, some of these decks can also be dependent on the card draw, and that's been a factor the entire game. But I feel like that might be a new or another level of balance that they're implementing on some of these decks, and I think that's what's really kept Rhymeworm's Bite in a more enjoyable view than what I first initially feared.
Yeah. I think a good example then would be to say, there's that surge that they have that says score this when you break a domain. Well, that generally means that you had to either have two of your own domains and you had to be willing to play a second one to break your first one, or your opponent had to be playing domains to break your domain. And like, it just means that there is a not insignificant chance that like you have the surge but you only have one domain, and it's
Yeah, and
just like, how do I make this line up?
right, and it's similar to like toxic terrors and whether or
Yep.
not you have enough of those, and
Yep.
also in my experience with rhyme locked relics, whether or not you have a rhyme locked relic in hand to put out for like defrosted seems so easy at a glance, and sometimes that sequencing just doesn't work out, and I think it's just another avenue of balance that we're seeing better design in decks, that
Yeah.
it's not all about the deck just flowing perfectly, because then that can just run rampant.
Right. I think that is something I don't think we've really ever talked about, but I think it is something we've all, pretty well internalized at this point, to be like, oh, there's a possibility of card draw order being a problem. If like, it's like, oh, if I need a specific power card to make this stuff work, well, I'd better have, like 3 of that effect to make sure that I can, have a better better odds of getting that thing when I need it. And I think it's actually a really good point, and we probably should have talked about this a lot earlier on the podcast, but like, that is a good thing to be able to use as a lever in deck design, to say
Absolutely.
like, hey, you've got these cool cards, but they're very power card dependent. And making things very power card dependent, whether that's gambits or upgrades, puts something of a limiter in the deck because it is not guaranteed.
Is there a term for this, like brickability, or
I don't think there's a real term for it. We could make something,
because it's like it is something that is internalized and experienced, but I don't hear it.
Yeah, we'll have to workshop that. Come up with a name. If you, listener, have a good idea as to what we should call this, or what the community should call this, let us know. We would love to coin a new term, something we can talk about. I'm
because
sure
I think
everyone would know what we were saying, but like, it'd be nice to just be able to be like, oh, that thing that happens.
yeah, because it's like you also it totally agree. It's like another lever of design that can make the game even better. And I think there's also warbands that aid the reducing the brickability of a deck, like say Hexbane's being able to cheat out upgrades, whereas another warband like Black Powder's Buccaneers being able to increase the brickability chance by like destroying like
Yeah.
taking away a Rime Locked Relic off of a fighter. That's really cool.
Yeah. Is very cool to be able to play around in that space, and has been done very little, and I hope that that's going to be seen a little bit more going forward, and it feels like we will probably.
I feel like Toxic Terrors is the wrong side of that scale. How do I phrase that differently? Like it's the
many,
rough. Yeah.
It's like they turned the lever too far,
Mm-hmm.
or the knob, I guess. And
I think
it's like, oh, you have to do it both in both sides. You have to have both poison gambits and poison upgrades. Like, oop, now it's like really rough.
There's
like
two
the meta
upgrades.
has borne out that it is too high a level of brickability.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, like there's two upgrades in that deck that don't do anything unless you also got a gambit poison that you could apply to an enemy, and then that enemy has to attack your upgraded fighter, right? So there's a lot of stars that need to align for that to work out, and those upgrades don't do too much for you in the meantime.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I think Rime Locked Relic and Malevolent Mask, I think, did an excellent job of hitting a sweet spot for what all the cards are offering you along that like card flow state like necessity.
Yeah, there's sort of like a spectrum of like, you can always score this, and this card needs quite a lot of setup to make it work, and like having a good mix across that spectrum is a good thing for a deck. And I think Toxic Terrors just doesn't always have enough in that like easy to score, get you started category, unless you can reliably score for making attacks with a leader, and some warbands can't do that. So yeah, I think that's actually a good point. And I think Beastbound Assault kind of saw the same problem, although that deck has more problems than just that. But so we're seeing some of these changes. I think these are all good like explanations as to what we're seeing with the two new decks. But we are still seeing some older decks, and I think I would say the most prevalent is Breakneck Slaughter by a wide margin.
Yeah.
Then Void Cursed, and then everything else is kind of just like seasoned to taste. Like you sort of see a little bit still of Fearsome Fortress, and you still see some people running. I mean, I'm sure Toxic Terrors is still getting used. It's just very, very rare because you have to have the right warband to pair it with.
It's just when you stack it up against all the other decks that you could
It's like,
pair
why
today.
Why would you pick this?
Because we have 16 Nemesis rivals universal decks, right?
Yeah, I mean, during Weird Hollow, there was a minute where it was 1 out of 6. There was a minute where it was 1 out of 8, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when, like, ever since we started filling out that universal deck picture, it became harder and harder to justify bringing Toxic Terrors.
Yeah, and while I still see Tooth and Claw get played some, I feel like largely Gnarlwood has sort of disappeared from this meta, at least from the deck standpoint. I don't want to say that the Gnarlwood warbands have disappeared. That's not true. But like the decks are mostly on the outside now, right? Like,
I think that's because of multiple factors. Is as they experiment with new decks and new mechanics and working these levers of brickability versus dice dependency versus what have you, they're innovating and they're going forward, and they're taking like, okay, well, we saw Tooth and Claw. Now, if we were making another aggro deck, what sort of new things do we want to implement? How do we want to balance that?
Right. Yeah.
And we see these levers getting adjusted and pushed forward. And that's what makes us all look forward to the new thing, is like, oh, I like Tooth and Claw, but I want to see them go further. Or I want to see them like maybe get the balance right on that brickability with the Toxic Terrors. And I think we've seen a lot more of that, like more balance in the brickability aspect. And it's not to Gnarlwood's fault. Like they paved the way. But also we've got the most experience with them, and, kind of stale, not to say that they're not good, but been there, done that kind of a thing. And so for the hygiene of the game, it's kind of nice to, give them a send off and go see what the next stuff is.
I know
Yeah.
that there's not a small number of folks out there. We see this in our local meta too, who are like, yeah, but that's rotating in October.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I've heard, essentially that being said in the sense of like that it might as well be out already. Like why would I invest time in it when I'm going to lose it in October?
And that's totally valid. It's
I
also
agree.
totally valid to bring Deadly Depths and win Adepticon. So props.
Hell yeah, it is.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
and with like the merits of Tooth and Claw and Daring Delvers, you have to compare those merits against Breakneck Slaughter and Hungering Parasite today. I think that those are kind of like your four main aggro options, and I think like you're probably going to pick Hungering Parasite versus or Breakneck over those two most of the time, unless you have like a very specific like niche fit.
yeah.
That's complementing Daring Delvers or Tooth and Claw. I think Breakneck Slaughter is a little overtuned in like its glory payout personally.
Yeah.
And like the reliability of that glory payout. So I think it's just an incredible option. And for aggro, and then like Hungering Parasite comes with so many neat tricks that like it's easy to like want to try it with different warbands and
Right.
kind of get the reliability it can bring in.
Yeah,
As
Hungering
well.
Parasites also just this really fun aggro idea of like it's sort of a Voltron deck, but they did a good job of balancing it, making sure you can't be too reliant on the Voltron. And it's kind of like the Venom symbiote thing from Marvel, where it's a parasite and it's not all good, and it's a balancing act, but it is this really cool, and I think they struck a really cool balance of pros and cons with it.
Well, Phil, you mentioned that Void Curse Thralls is something that you're still seeing a lot of, and I just want to call out how interesting it is that it's no longer like the most prevalent thing that we're seeing. Like its
Right.
power level has not gone down. Like
Nope.
it is still incredible.
Yeah.
But there are finally like Void Curse Thralls for a while felt like the deck that fit with anything, right? And
Yeah.
I think the last three decks that have been released, like not only have this element of newness that everybody's trying, but can also pair with so many things that we're finally seeing like Void Curse Thralls like just get a break. Like,
Yeah. Well, and
Well,
I think that's a good point that yes, you can kind of use Void Curse with most warbands, but there really were a lot where it was a bit of a shoehorn, where it was like, I'm going to use this one because it has like the least downsides for me, but like I really would prefer something else for this warband.
yeah.
And now that we have those options, I think that's at least in part why we're not seeing it used everywhere. I think it still brings lots to the table, but you don't always want it. And so I think we're seeing the appropriate like balancing out of like, I need those control aspects, or my warband cares about movement specifically. And so like, the deck offers a lot of that. So I'm going to bring that.
Well, I think what just makes for a good, strong universal deck is movement. And Void Curse Thralls, Breakneck Slaughter both have that in spades. And it goes back to the fundamentals of warfare. Sun Tzu,
Sure.
flank them and spank them.
Yeah. Very different ways of bringing extra movement. In some ways, Breakneck is giving you extra move, but in short bursts and not like in the utility of it is that I can go fast to smack you in the face.
It basically temporarily expands your existing movement.
Right. Yeah. And then with Void Curse, it's more like I get more choices to do movement actions.
Yeah, more opportunities.
Yeah. And so it's like both useful, very different. So I do like that. I think, we've definitely talked a lot now about all the different decks, what we're seeing with, what's prevalent. I think, I would say past Void Curse, we really do start to see a lot of stuff drop off. One deck that I think we haven't really seen or heard from or talked much about since probably Adepticon, really, is what happened with Force of Frost. I know it got some more nerfs, but it still should be good, right?
I
I
think
think
the
it,
same thing that's happening with Eplum, personally.
yeah,
Yeah, just people are sick of it.
I like that angle. That's part of it, I think. And I think Eplum actually is a better case for what I'm about to say than Force of Frost. But I think in both cases, there's an element of like we were introduced to them at the height of their power, and so it just like as there's a perception of like these have been nerfed and therefore are no longer good because they've been hit, so hard, if you
Sure.
will, at least in perception. And yes, there are multiple angles that have been hit in each of these decks. But I think Athlum lands towards the top of the Path to Glory tier list, and I think that that's still true. And I think Force of Frost has fallen down from being like so ubiquitously good to more of um, uh, more of a pick that you need more of a reason for bringing along.
Yeah,
Like,
it's truly the wizard deck now,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
you can't use it if you don't have good wizards.
There you go. I think so. So I think they kind of like when they hit that one in particular, they brought it more down to the purpose of being a wizard companion than just being universally good. But there's still places where you can and could still consider it and succeed with it. Like I don't think it's out of the conversation entirely if you don't have a wizard. It just becomes like a more critical look than it was before.
yeah. And one of the things I would say is I think it's just kind of natural for the reason why we haven't seen these things is like uh, Weird Hollow was right after Gnarlwood, and so it's the second oldest rule set currently, and so those things have been around, just only a little bit younger than Gnarlwood. So again, people want to try out the new shiny, and while there was cool innovations made in these decks, we finally got the wizard making upgrade. Um, we've been playing with it for a while, and people want to try out the new things, see the new levers that have been pulled and how things have been balanced. And yeah, they were overtuned, and so they got nerfed a little bit. And that's not to say that they've been nerfed into the ground. In fact, I think they're still sleepers, lurking, and people just because they're tired of them, they haven't been playing with them. But just naturally, as things get older, as the war bands get older, you see less people just playing them because they're the new hotness or they're the new shiny. But more they're playing them because of the passion for the faction, for the themes behind the faction and the decks. And so you'll just see more of a distillation of people playing them for those reasons rather than new shiny.
Sure. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
and
that makes a lot of sense.
I think that introduction to them has a lot to contribute to what Brian was just saying, right? Like if we had instead been introduced to Efflum and Force of Frost today as they have been errated, I think that we would find both to be quite strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree, and I would offer as an example, like, do you think we have more Velmorn players now than we did when they first came out?
Oh, 100%. It has
I
to
think
be.
so, but I like
I mean, part of that is that they were new, shiny, and they're dope, and everybody played them as fresh out the box. But I think you actually have more people playing them seriously because they've been getting better, and people are able to actually field them.
see
Um,
that's
than when they,
another
yeah,
instance of where I wish reintroduction could occur, right? Like we see these
Yeah.
changes, and for most these changes, buff or nerf, like they're in a living document that you have to be aware of, and like those items have to catch your interest, and sometimes they can just say, well, okay, like I've been playing them as is, and I don't want to deal with the nerf. Like there's so many emotions that go into receiving these things, and some of them can be based on your preconceived notions. So, like a buff on something like Valmorn or Loon Court, people can be like, "Nah, yeah, but like I did not like them already, so like I'm not going to go try this buff. But I think in both cases, if they were introduced today, they'd be more prevalent and doing better. Loon Court especially. I think Loon Court are really underrated right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that like people have a sort of well, this is just sort of, I think, universally true. People have a first opinion bias where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
yep, that was my first taste of this thing. I don't want another.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't really care what they do with it. I'm not gonna go back to that. I've moved on to something else that I enjoy, and I'm not gonna like go back to it just because it might be fun now. I'm already having fun with these other things, so I definitely agree. Um, so I think we could maybe build on this discussion. It's sort of naturally happened, and it's so nice when that happens. We were kind of talking about warbands, and I don't want to just say like, oh, let's just list them all and say where they belong, because that is kind of, one, take too long, and two, I don't think is useful. But
And
so
is a tier list.
yeah, and is a tier list. But so I mean, we mentioned, okay, Ephraim's kind of fallen off, and we gave the reasons, and then we said, oh, well, here's these other ones that got buffed. What are the other things that we're seeing, feeling about warbands? This kind of comes back a little bit to, we talked about Brethren. Nobody's really playing Brethren. We're not seeing them. We think they're curious. We still think they should be tried more, and I think we will. But there's other warbands going on, and so I'll just say, let's start with Skinnerkin. We all said we think these aren't going to be very good when they first came out. Why do we think that is now different? What is it that we didn't see that we're now seeing, and why do you think they're being used as much as they are?
Ooh, I'll jump in. Tell me if I'm right or wrong here, Phil. Since you're what I would say our resident expert on this.
Yeah.
I don't think we realized how much can be scored and accomplished off of successful attacks. So when you look at an aggro warband, you think to yourself, like, how many fighters am I taking off the board? And they don't ask that question. They ask you, how many haunches can you get? And therefore, how many successful like chip damage attacks can we get? Like, I think one of the things that we missed was how much they love a fighter that just starts the game charging towards their territory, because now they can focus their attentions on just attacking that fighter at safety, like as safe as they can stay away from the other warband,
Yeah.
while chipping away and getting their entire game plan going.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think that is the big miss, is that they're not a warband that cares about kills. They're a warband that cares about landing attacks and gaining haunches. And it's a game. They're like a warband of resource management, not a warband of killing the opponent.
Of course,
And
the cannibalistic chefs are about resource management. How did we miss that?
but I think the other piece, and I guess you alluded to it in a way, but it's just that their glory ceiling is insanely high.
Mm-hmm.
They have so much glory in their deck, and the fact that they have some hidden in their power deck as well is something I didn't quite appreciate upon just reading them. So I think that's probably why we've seen them. I tend to agree that like they might still have some inconsistencies, but I think they're so much better than what we thought they were, because we tend to, or at least I think us older players tend to still look at the game from like a dire chasm lens, where it was like, you got to be able to kill people, and you might need
Yeah,
to do it in a hurry.
I know. I think from my perspective, I saw, there was a lot of glory potential in their deck, but I thought that the fighters were paper targets. So I thought it was kind of a race against time before you get tabled. And it was kind of like this gambit of, there's a ton of glory in the deck, but you're not going to see all of it because you're just trying to get as much as you can before you're maxed out. And is that enough? And that's not been the case. I've been always just staggered by the reliability of the glory that they're able to just generate for just haunch. It's wild, and it's cool. But it's cool to see a warband exceed expectations. But I would say that one thing I've noticed, and this is me griping as a swarm hold objective gets player, is that hold objective used to be the reliable get glory, and I'm trying to score more before I get tabled. And aggro always was their glory came from denying the opponent glory by killing their fighters, denying their ability to do their objectives. And where they struggled was A, dice dependency and making sure that their attacks were successful, and then B, their objective deck was hard to be reliable, because if your dice aren't flowing, your objective decks usually weren't successful in the like kill 2 fighters or kill 3 fighters by round 2 or something. So it was hard to make aggro reliable if the dice weren't cooperating. Since Dire Chasm, I think maybe even beginning in Dire Chasm, we saw a lot more end phase objectives that were reliable and more concerned for aggro, that were more concerned with positioning rather than were your dice cooperative. And I think at this point we're seeing kind of what I might consider a critical mass of reliable aggro objective decks plus reliable stats to get aggressive attacks off. And so I've had games as Gits where I score in the 20s and my opponent scored 19, not including bounty. And I was just like, how am I supposed to catch up with that? Because not only did you score 19 in your objective deck, you certainly scored 5+ in bounty.
Right.
And that is a massive amount of glory, at least in old considerations for an aggro warband.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in there a little bit. So the tier list episode by Path to Glory, it's their latest episode, at least as of 7/28 when we're recording today. Definitely go check it out. I think it's good or great. Like it's so fun listening to them dive into the meta in the way that they do in that episode. And they talk about how Sepulchral Guard is the only warband that they put in the A tier. And the reason I'm highlighting that is because and I think they touch on this as well, I would say that like right now there isn't a good enough glory incentive, or like even just incentive in general, for bringing a warband that isn't going to be able to use the charged out rule. So like if I bring a warband with 3 to 5 models, I can think to myself, okay, as I start losing models, especially 3 to 4, I'm going to get more and more opportunity out of the charged out rule. And so my fighters are going to go further. When you're playing a swarm warband or horde warband, like you have numbers, and that can help you score, hold objectives, but there isn't enough payout. Like there aren't enough decks that grant high reward for that universally. And I think like more often than not, you're saying, here's some easy kills. Like you're almost saying, all right, like what I'm actually bringing to the table is I'm offering my opponent more glory, this game.
Yeah, unfortunate, but I think that's probably true.
You have to fill all 7 places on the board, so like you have to think about who's within risk, because somebody's going to be within risk, and so those could be easy seed glory opportunities for an already reliable aggro strategy. So like I think it makes a lot of sense that we see Sepulchral Guard at the top of the list, because they can res fighters, and like it's hard to kind of like beat them down and hold them back when they're scoring off of both holding and res. And they can keep bringing back fighters that they've invested in, and they get better, when they've been resurrected. So I think it's no surprise to see them at the top, and I wonder what it would take to bring the others up. So this is me bringing in some hot spice real quick, but I think the game could benefit from giving a reward to higher counts, and you could do that with gameplay strategy of like, okay, so what is a higher count normally going to be able to do? They're normally going to be able to hold a little bit more. Well, what if at the end of every round you got a glory, whether it be spent or not, for holding more? Like what if we baked hold more into every round of the game? I think you might have to bring Sepulchral Guard down a notch. Maybe not. But
Yeah, that's very interesting because when we introduce new people to the game, you kind of say these are objective tokens. You want to hold them. You want to have a fighter on them, and they're like, "What do I get for it? Nothing unless the card says so." So it would be interesting to
Yeah.
implement something that would give an inherent benefit.
This is what I loved about Nethermaze. So Nethermaze, we didn't have like this high reliability of
right.
aggro scoring, but you had cards that said, regardless of what warband you are, you're going to care about holding some of these. And even if you're dipping only lightly into that picture, we have defensive benefits for you for hanging out there. So like everybody was positioning on all of these feature tokens, and that was blocking each other from it. So like it was so integral at that point in
Yeah.
time.
So I don't disagree with any of that. I think personally, I wouldn't necessarily want it to become a universal thing, because it's really not that we need everyone to care about objectives. It's that we need the warbands that care about objectives to be able to perform. And either that is bring aggro back down a little bit, I think. I think aggro is very strong right now. I don't think anyone would disagree about that. Or we need to bring hold objective benefits, which you were mentioning, that like it's hard to get enough reward for doing this thing. Bring those up. Like we don't see a lot of Paths of Prophecy because those objectives do not pay out enough glory. Like
Right.
for what you're having to do, you are usually doing a lot. And some warbands can do it, but like you're having to sort of bend over backwards when your opponent's like just taking a walk through the park to be like, I'm gonna go walk over and smack you, and you're like, but that was the exact number of this objective that I needed to be holding right at this moment.
And it can be very telegraphed. Like you keep trying to get on to objective 5. The
Right.
aggro player, after 2 activations of seeing this, goes, okay, none of that.
Yeah, and I do feel for the game designers, because we definitely know what it looks like when hold becomes overtuned, and it is also problematic. So this will probably keep swinging back and forth. There's a pendulum to this, trying to design the game in such a way that like we can try and make the game interactive, because lots of people don't like games where everyone just stands off, but we also want to make sure that there's different play styles and we want to reward different things. So I agree that like right now it's tough. Hold is not probably where we want it to be, and I think we see this in the sense that like we just got a really good hold warband refreshed in the Thorns of the Briar Queen. I've seen people play them. Sorry?
And the Gits.
Oh, yeah. And the Gits. Yes. They were also refreshed. And we see them played, but I feel like they're just never really going to make it in that like podium position, because it's so hard to, do enough without losing a whole bunch of glory. So,
yeah. I want to jump in there real quick with a Thorns thought too.
Okay.
Just Thorns specifically, I think have entered the game again, or the meta, at an unfortunate time, because I think they work really well with Paths of Prophecy and Rhymelach Relic, and that's all great. However, I think Hungering Parasite is a strong counter to that warband, and unfortunately, it's very popular, and it is popular for a reason. But when you have fighters that rely on being inspired and have low health, if like hits and pings, can come through and take them down, that's unfortunate. And if you ever create adjacencies with them, which they want to do, they're like, hey, I'll go get adjacent to you, get myself inspired. If you're exactly, if you're the Parasite player and you're playing any breaks in your deck at all, you're like, okay, yeah, that's great. I'll break, hand you the Parasite, and this is why I think it's such a hard counter. Hand you the Parasite, you're now on 1 dodge, and I get rerolls against you, and you only have about 2 health generally. So you can, a Hungering Parasite warband can just rip through Thorns, and so I think that they're going to struggle in this meta to ever rise to a podium through Hungering Parasite players.
And I think maybe it's worth mentioning, as you brought up the 2 wound thing. 2 wound fighters are a real problem, I think, right now in this meta. Partially because of Rhymeworm, but I think partially just because we now have this large critical mass of decks where damage is existing in pings, and that means that kills are not entirely tied to your action efficiency. Um,
Yeah,
it's not a new problem, but it's something that I think people have probably been feeling maybe more recently, and that it's like if you're bringing warbands with 2 wound fighters, you have to have a good game plan for what you're going to do about somebody who runs a lot of ping. And I don't necessarily see that as like toxic. I don't think it's like broken the game, but it does mean that right now certain warbands get bumped down a little bit because it's very hard for them to get past certain things.
agree.
Yeah, it kind of gatekeeps a little bit.
A little bit. It's not to say that 2 wound fighters can't still be good. Like I've played plenty of with 2 wound fighters that can still do work, but it is a liability. So you have to think about that, and I think hopefully some of that changes.
Man, if you gave Glizette +1 wound,
Oh no,
Dread Pageant would be
don't do that.
in the conversation.
Don't give Glizette 3 wounds. That'd be too good. But yes,
Please.
I think so. That would be crazy.
Please. Just a little.
Don't need to like stay in this area too long, but I do think there's a couple other warbands we should probably talk about and things that we've been seeing around those warbands. Hexbane. They've been able to sort of use all of these top decks that we mentioned, and it feels like they can use all of them effectively. I don't personally see Hexbanes as problematic, but I do think they're very strong. They're definitely having a bit of a moment right now. I don't know. Is there more to say about them other than that? Like, man, they can just kind of do everything.
Well, I'll start with we're on the Discords. We see you.
Yeah. We hear you, folks. We see what you're saying. We know your pain.
There's a lot of down with the Hexbane conversation right now.
Yeah.
Brian, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna push back a bit and say like, yeah, I don't think they're S tier. I don't think they are a warband that is just like, oh my god, straight broken auto win. They're like glass cannon, and I think they're a really fun warband in the sense that it's like it's a zealotous inquisitor with his entourage, and he's willing to sacrifice all of them in the pursuit of his goals. And I don't think they're S tier. I think they're very strong. I think that after over 2 years now, because Nethermaze has rotated out, over 2 years now, we've seen them consistently popping up. Sometimes it's a big spike, but there's always usually 1 or 2 in a tournament. And because they are a consistently performing warband, they have a lot of redundancy in that they get benefits when negative things happen to them. And I think that is borne out over the last 2 years that they are just that little bit too consistent. And kind of to the detriment of most other aggro warbands.
So I don't think that they're overly problematic. Like problematic feels like almost too harsh in this conversation for them,
Sure.
because I think that they're just on the edge of like healthy. Like I do think that their consistency that we've seen from them like probably requires a little bit of a small whack, but I don't want to see them nerfed hard, and I don't want to see them nerfed into irrelevancy. Like I think a couple light taps could be really good for just kind of bringing them in line and giving more warbands better opportunity against them, because I think sitting down against them can often feel like an uphill battle. Like if the first thing they throw at you is a dog, you have to invest an action into taking that dog out without any payout if you don't have anything surge wise that's going to score for you off of a successful attack or taking a fighter out of action. So that can be a bummer, as kind of like that first thing that you're encountering. Not to say that that investment isn't worthwhile and isn't interesting. Like I do like that that's there, but there's one card I'm just going to highlight right now that needs to be addressed, and that's the retractable pistol. I hate this card. I think that this card just like I don't want to sit here and like rant too long about it, but it's range 4, which is wild for what it is. Like it's a pistol, a pop out pistol that hides underneath the sleeve. Its action is surprise, but you can do it every time somebody moves within range 4.
Yeah.
That's not surprising.
Exile Dead cry when they see that upgrade come out.
Yeah. So I feel like as soon as this upgrade comes out, it taxes the other player for playing against Hexbane. And so I hope something happens to this card.
Yeah, so I think to round out the discussion, I don't want to spend a ton of time on each of these warbands, and I don't.
Yeah.
No, I want to rant.
I know. We could be here for hours, but I think
GW, hire an American that knows what guns do. This little Derringer should not be an auto turret.
But just I think in my experience playing against Hexbanes, their skill ceiling is so incredibly high.
Yeah.
So when you see them at these high levels in tournaments, you're just like, man, this warband is insane.
I agree.
But when you see somebody who's like newer with the warband play them, you're just kind of like, oh yeah, that's right. The skill floor on this warband is also very high. And like it can be very difficult to get to the point where you're able to play them at that super high level. And in that way, I don't necessarily see them as a huge problem, because like it's not like you just sit down with these guys and just auto win every game.
I would
fact.
I would also say that like we're seeing it's been 2 years. There's been enough people dabbling and playing with them where they've got experience under their belt. So it's not just somebody who's been grinding at them in a short amount of time. It's now people who have been playing them with for potentially years.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing a combination of that. But I also just played like last week against Petey, and they were doing Malevolent Masks and Hexbanes, and I was playing Gits, and I ended up with 18 to 16. And they're a relatively new player. This is like one of the first Nemesis pairing decks for them. Like, there's definitely some redundancy and resilience there. Granted, it was how many of my Gits died?
Enough.
Would have been. I had 3 remaining, so they got
6.
Yeah,
6,
so they got 6 glory from the bounty. So yeah, they got 10. Yeah.
So yeah, that goes to Phil's point there. Yeah. Like I think it just comes down to consistency, and like when you're up against this warband, I feel like it's the only warband in the game that offers you a ton of like agency as the opponent in like target selection as well, which is difficult. Like I know I mentioned the dog, but you also anytime you fight a hunter, right, like you're potentially giving them an upgrade or releasing a charge token, from the board. So you got to manage that. If Amos is alive, you got to fear for the dreaded axe, that can split down your largest fighter in one hit. And even again, going back to the dog, if you take out a dog, you invest in that. Well, now you've also inspired
Pock and the other dog.
Pock and the other dog. And in fact, most cases where like there's inspirations that you're also interacting with and managing. So yeah, it's a high skill warband on both sides. Like playing against it, like you need practice against it. Playing as it, high floor, high ceiling. It's interesting, but I do, I guess just to wrap back, I think that we've just seen a little too much consistency from them that's emerged over time. If they were, had just come out, I don't think that we would be talking, like even in the Nemesis environment, it would take time to see this. And now that we've seen it, it's like, I think there's a little too much consistency for the high level players there.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair, but I like them being in the game. I think that they're interesting. I think that they they provide a very different a very different take on aggro, which I like. So
Yeah,
I
no, I do like them, and they're just a little consistent, and that causes people to think that they are the S tier. I don't think they are, but they could probably use an adjustment and screw that pistol.
yeah, well, the pistol I think we can agree is a little bit ridiculous.
So to cover another warband that has sat at the top of prevalency before, how do you two feel about Domatan right now? Those vile fort cracking jerks.
Well, we know we've seen Sax Tom sort of champion the breakneck slaughter version of them to pretty good effect, but they've certainly not been the boogeymen they once were. I don't think they're still very good. I would still say they're certainly contenders, but I think between having their Inspire change and then having for the Force of Frost changes, they have so many fewer options to pair with, and then if you're playing them straight aggro, which you basically are these days, like there's failure points. There's things that can go wrong for you.
Sure.
And with 3 fighters, you're fighting against some action efficiency problems, especially as you start losing fighters. So
I think you will have pushback from both of us in the sense that I think even if their deck brickability comes up, which is rare, I think it's not easily borne out in a best of 3 that their brickability is strong enough to really hold them back. Because even if it does brick, you just go, well, here I go bonking, and they have incredible stats, and I think it's so reliable. I do think that they are at the top of the meta.
I do too.
I don't think that they are necessarily S tier like they were with Force of Frost, as when both were pre-nerfs. But I do think that their stats put them at a level that is in the same vein as Hexbane. They do need a few taps.
So I want to give credit where credit is due, and Saxton brought Breakneck Slaughter, Domitans like into the public eye, right? And did so like amazingly. Like that is a great pilot on a great combination that he at least discovered from
He's put the time in.
from like a meta standpoint. Like I had not seen, this combo break into the public meta until, Saxton was showing it off and doing so very well. And I think to his credit, he has found a pairing that I find to be too broken. Like if there's one pairing in the game today that I think is broken, I'm there.
broken.
I think so. I think when you combine the reliability in scoring from the Breakneck Slaughter deck and then add it to these absolute ranged stat blocks, and you say, hey, you're no longer balanced on your movement speed, but we're also going to give you movement speed buffs that are often also going to give you dice and damage buffs. Like, I just think that it's really easy for them to come in and delete your key fighter and then be like impossible to escape. Like, I try spending a game running away from Domiton Storm Coven, like with Breakneck Slaughter. It's not going to happen.
Run away from them.
Can't do it.
Just don't.
So like Phil, you've been playing them, and Skyler got spanked and robbed by them. So I got spanked by them at Canada, but I got spanked by a few people, so I don't necessarily hold a bear grudge against them for that reason. I do think that they are just stat blocks, and that's hard to overcome. And when you pair them with super reliable scoring and even more damage stats with Breakneck Slaughter, I think it's just doubling down on too good of a thing.
I will certainly say they're very, very good in the current meta. I don't I don't think they're broken by any means. I think that the event results bear that out. People are not winning tournaments with them right now. And it's not to say that you couldn't. I think they definitely can. I think they're very strong, but I don't think they're broken. Like, I think we have a very, and maybe this is a good time just for, because I think we've kind of hit on a lot of the like top stuff that should probably be talked about at this point. We could mention a few others, like Headcrack is still hanging around. They can do cool stuff with primacy. Mournflight are still really good. They can do a lot of different things right now. Sirenized Razors.
Mournflight is definitely another one that I think could use a tab or two.
I don't know though. Like, we're saying like, oh, these are strong, so we should do something about them. But like, if they're all kind of at that same power level and we have enough of them that it's not like it's only these two warbands or something like it used to be with FLM and Domatan, do we need to change anything in terms of the warbands, or do we just need to wait for things to shake out?
And that's a good point, because it's like, as we've had time to breathe in this meta, we're now calling out these things that are currently rising to the top as these are the consistent performers. And it's always interesting to see what's new around like, do those need to be adjusted, or is the thing right around the corner going to bring something else into prevalence, going to bring something else that lowers somebody else's prevalence?
Right.
And I think maybe what this all culminates to say is Q3, we're going to see what that it turns out to be. And if this continues to bear out, I don't think we're going to get any releases before our Q3 event.
No, I don't think so. I think we'd be lucky to, well, I wouldn't say lucky, but like we probably will see something before Nova, but like probably not much. Well, not a lot of time with it at any rate.
Yeah, I mean, we're just shy of 3 weeks out, and we have a 2-week cutoff too. So
for our event,
so it's pretty locked in.
Yeah.
So given the past, we're gonna see immediate new stuff on Nova, right?
Oh, for sure.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's gonna be like the day, like the week before or something. They'll be like, "Here's all this new stuff," and it's like,
or the day of.
But I think so to the point, and I think the conversation was kind of coming to this, is to say, we have a lot of warbands right now in this meta, and I think our discussion kind of agrees to this point that like there's a good handful, maybe handful plus, if you want to start to like include a few maybe that are slightly below the ones we've discussed in more detail, there it's like all of these are competitors. We think all of these perform consistently in the meta right now. And I guess it bears the question, how do we feel then about where this meta is? Do we think it's healthy? Do we think there needs to be lots of changes? Do we just think when the next releases come out, we'll see what happens? Like, I think I kind of have a sense of what you guys think. But just to put a bow on it, let's directly answer the question. How do you feel about the meta right now?
Yeah. Well, and I think this helps me put a bow on it. I just want to emphasize that I don't actually think that Domatan as a warband is broken. I do think that pairing in particular is the best pairing in the game right now. That's me. But
I would agree.
I don't actually see it standing in too high of opposition to a healthy meta. I actually think that we have a really healthy meta right now.
Yeah, it's not head and shoulders above the rest. It is, just maybe a little bit taller than the rest.
Jockeying for that top position, right?
Yeah. But I would agree. I think this is probably going to go down as one of the healthiest metas and fondly looked back upon, similar to Nethermaze, but also like I look back fondly a lot to Dire Chasm's releases.
Same.
Maybe it wasn't Dire Chasm wasn't a well-groomed or curated meta, because that was in the middle of the pandemic and there wasn't erratas coming out, and so it wasn't curated at the competitive level. But in terms of releases and quality of releases, I think Dire Chasm was also looked back fondly upon, and I think we are currently living in another heyday of this is cool.
Yeah, lots of cool stuff. I think like I've mentioned a couple of times now, I feel like the top of the meta is pretty wide, and I think that the tier just below the top of the meta is also very wide. Like I think there's plenty of warbands that are like maybe you wouldn't ever look at them and be like, man, that seems maybe too good, but are still competitive, right? Where like player skill could still mean that like taking that one tier below warband could still mean you win a tournament. And I think that's
Hmm.
a really awesome place to be, where it's like
I think so too.
I don't feel like I have to reach for Ephelem, because if I don't, I'm maybe
Right.
doing myself a disservice. Like,
Yeah, back in Adepticon, that's how I felt. I felt like I had
or
to.
like LVO, only one Ephelem was brought, and look what happened, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And it's like, well, we don't have that right now, and I think that's really cool.
Hmm.
And I really
That should
like
be
it.
cherished.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that our initial takes on Wintermaw were a bit off, and that there like
Yeah.
is this like cool experimentation phase, and that we're finding all these cool pairings and testing all this stuff. I think this has been, the last couple of months have been a really fun time for just like trying things out, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, being surprised when you like face off against something that you'd written off, and then seeing it go off and being like, whoa, this is so much better than I thought it was. And now I have to like rethink everything that I thought about how this warband pairing works. Um,
It feels so good to hear Brian speaking to like how healthy he feels the meta is and how cherished it should be when our last release was Rhymeworm's Bite.
yeah, right. I know. Not to dig at Brian too much, but like I for sure, like for real, like there was a real fear. And I don't think it's bad to like say that that was a real concern, and that like there was a possibility that things got really toxic. And I'm really glad to say that I don't think they have, and I don't think they will, at least
I
not
agree.
until we see our next release, and who knows what that'll bring. But
And I don't
uh
think that those fears were like unmerited or
no,
unwarranted at the time.
I mean the deck
You know,
looked scary.
yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
and I personally know a few folks that, um, like that deck, just reading it, like not having the play experience against it yet, or even like your first game against it where you don't really know how it works and it just tore you apart. I've seen that like pull this the spirit out of people. Like, you know what, like I'm gonna not be as invested in Underworlds right now. Like that happened to a few folks that I know,
Hmm.
um and they've heard that the waters aren't so bad, and they're coming back in, and that
Yeah.
makes me that
So an
makes me really
immediate
happy.
immediate argument against doing what I did, and don't be that doomsayer and put people off, because then we have less people to test it and prove whether or not it is. Because even though I was very fearful of Ramworm's Bite, I think I might have contributed to that, of putting people off and being like, I'm going to wait out the storm. But then we have less people playing it, less people testing whether or not that's true, and then providing data to either course correct or to assuage the fears.
And I think just now thinking about how what you just said, that one thing that I think maybe I'm going to think of going forward is that I'm going to give designers a lot more credit on like first takes of decks, because I didn't really see how either of these decks were going to work the way they do now.
Yeah, I might have yelled at a couple
And
people a little
and
bit verbally
and,
online.
and it's like, oh, this is so much different than I thought it was on paper.
I'm sorry.
And I think going forward, I'm going to reserve a lot more judgment, and I'm just going to be like, I want to test it. I want to see how it plays. I don't want to like obviously we do reviews. Like everyone listening to this will likely have read or heard one of our reviews, and that's still going to happen. It's not like I'm just going to be like, no, I won't review a card because I don't know how it's going to play. But I'm going to definitely be a little bit more like hedging, to be like, I think this is how it's going to be. I don't really know. And I think that it could probably come out better than I'm expecting, or maybe it'll be worse than I was expecting. But either way, we'll need the play experience to know for sure.
It will also be nice to, now that we are completely in a Nemesis meta, 16 Nemesis decks, we've seen a whole sweep of those builds. We now have a lot of comparison points to say, is this going to be similar to that? Is it going to be like, like Tooth and Claw? I don't think we've actually seen any edits to Tooth and Claw, right? But Gnarl Spirit definitely needed an edit. But at the time, those were the only two decks: Daring Delvers and Tooth and Claw just stood head and shoulders above in terms of a lot of choices, and especially with Gnarl Spirit pack. And now we have so much more options, and it's made the meta super fun. And I think, we have a lot more comparison points to be like, okay, in reality, what is this going to pan out to be like, and have better formed opinions and less hot takes on my part.
I want to jump in there because you touched on something that I want to shine a light on, because I think it's really cool. Is that part of the health that we're excited about, I think, is seeing that Nemesis fully realized, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
Like when we were, only comparing Gnarlwood decks to Gnarlwood decks, and feeling that was the entire state of the game, because we'd pivoted to Nemesis, we're only there with 2, 3, 4 decks. That's a much different picture than being able to see how 14 decks right now. 14 decks together.
16, right?
Well, it will become 16 hopefully, by the end.
Yes.
When Wintermaw's full. Yeah.
And so, seeing Nemesis going forward, if we're always rolling one half season out, Nemesis is always going to be a pool of 14 to 16 decks. So this is the first time we've ever got to experience what the vision was, and like the vision feels healthy. It's really cool to sit down and think like, I have this warband and I could put them with a number of 14 different decks. And as somebody who came into Nemesis feeling like the drought of only having a few decks to play with and coming from Championship, that was a really tough sell for me for a while. We guest spotted on the Battle Mallet podcast, and they asked us how we felt about Nemesis versus Champion. I dunked on Nemesis and I said Championship for life. But now, like, I have like a really great deck building experience that isn't the same as Championship, but parallels Championship enough for me, like in like the amount of considerations I have to make.
Right. I definitely, and like I want to dunk on Championship now, because it's like I think every player at the highest competitive level has to have a greater knowledge and depth of knowledge of the entire card pool than they ever did during a Championship meta.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That might be true. That's a pretty big statement, but I don't disagree that generally your knowledge does need to be a bit wider now than it used to be in Nemesis, for sure. And there's the design of Nemesis decks means there's more viable cards. Like the bottom tier cards that are available are so much better than what they were in Championship, where you just don't just throw like oh, there's like 10 of these that I just never have to think about ever again because they're completely unplayable.
What are these 50 to 60 hunger cards that I've set aside and never look at?
Hey, those Crimson Court players, they cared about those cards. But yeah, I think all very good points. I think we're seeing a lot of really cool stuff right now in the game. I've certainly been enjoying the game a lot. Every time I sit down to a game, I'm seeing something new, seeing something different, playing something that was fun. Very, very rarely have games where I'm just like, well, that was kind of a foregone conclusion. Like, whoops, that wasn't very fun. I can count on, I think there's been 1 or 2 games where that has happened, and it's not necessarily been because of the decks of the warbands. Is just like dice luck or something. And so a really, really cool spot to be in. Any other final thoughts about the meta before we start to close things out here?
Needs more elves.
More elves, yeah, I think that's fair. We haven't seen an elf in a while. I guess we could, since we're talking, what do you, let's just throw out some ideas here quick right at the end. What do you hope to see with these next releases? We're anticipating that they should be close, and I'm not saying like I think it's going to be this warband, but like if you wanted to inject a thing into this meta, what would it be?
One being a very hold objective or deck.
Yeah,
thorough.
I would
hold,
like,
one
yeah.
that Flex has to kind of side eye and be like, can I?
Yeah, like, is this really what I want?
Yeah, that would be really cool.
I would like that.
I've got some warband wish lists, but I don't think that is more meta focused, you know.
Yep.
So we're overdue for some Seraphon, some Tree Folk.
Yeah, there's plenty of warbands that we could like to see, but I think, I guess to answer my own question, I agree with Brian. But please, pure hold. It won't break the game, I don't think, right now. And then I'd like to see another oddball deck. And like maybe something more control. Like I thought that Hungering Parasite was going to be control when I first read it. I was like, oh, this feels very much like it should be control.
Like passing it off to your opponent.
I think it's very aggro now that I've played with and against it. And I don't know if that was intended or not, but I would like to see something else that's very control, a la Void Curse Thralls. I think it's healthy for the game. Obviously, if it's like too oppressive, people just get salty about it because they're like, well, now I can't play with my toys, and I don't want that. But like, just a little spice here and there. And
I want to see a plot card that works off of like amount of either surviving friendly fighters or dead friendly fighters. Like I could see it swing either way.
Builds as the game. Like either you start at your best and you sort of lose stuff as you go, or like
I think vice versa.
Build as you lose fighters, kind of thing.
Yeah, so like either you're front loading the strength into
almost like soul power.
Yeah. Or as you lose forces, the number of forces you lose like elevates the remaining forces.
Sure. I think there's plenty of room for all sorts of different plot
designs. Unstoppable
that we haven't seen yet, and I would certainly enjoy any kinds of stuff like that.
Brian, it's coming. That's why you have one defense dice now.
But I think that can round us out, right? Any final thoughts before we close it up this time?
Only other pipe dream for meta decks would be, it'd be interesting to have a new Essentials pack that was basically a Grand Alliance Universal deck. So you could just have a Nemesis pairing of any Destruction Warband with this Destruction Universal deck.
Sure.
I think calling it Essentials maybe a bit misleading, but I see what you're saying. Like essential to that Grand Alliance, and you're saying, I imagine Evergreen doesn't rotate out.
Yeah, it'd be a very generalistic deck, not much of a not exactly going to be the best choice compared to Seasons, but it's something that could be consistent going forward, so you always have it to fall back on. And I think it could be a cool branch into something of a new look for Championship. But that's my pipe dream.
Well, I would love all of those things to happen. I think those all sound like great ideas. Maybe the designers listen to our podcast and they can make that happen. But in the meantime,
my mom doesn't even listen to this podcast. Nobody listens to me.
We know that we have plenty of people listening to this podcast.
I'm just being self-deprecating. That's fair.
But I think we'll wrap it up here. This was a fun discussion. I look forward. I think this could be something we can do on a semi-regular basis in the summertime. There's usually a kind of a lull in the middle of the summer, I feel like. So
yeah, that's when they usually put their tentpole release out. The 40K new edition or the Age of Sigmar new edition. So
yeah. So to close things up, as usual, if you have any thoughts about this episode, other episodes, other things you just want to let us know about, you can most reliably reach out to us at our Discord. We have links to join that Discord. There's always people hanging out in there. It's a good time. and it's easy to reach us. But if you also just don't use Discord for whatever reason, or if you want to use our old channels, we still have at WTHcast on formerly Twitter, X, and then whatthehexcast@gmail.com. And then if you would like to check out any of our past episodes, other shows in the Mortal Realms network, you can head on over to themortalrealms.com. We have coverage for pretty much everything Age of Sigmar, all the different game systems, different things about the lore. Black Library interviews have been hot recently. We've been having plenty of authors getting to talk to. Go check those things out. And then for our next episode, unclear. We are still holding out hope for a new warband and deck, but we really don't know. We would have expected to see that by now if it was coming. So maybe since in 2 weeks from when this episode comes out, it'll basically be time for our Q3, and we might have more to discuss about that. So stay tuned. It should be fun regardless, but I think it is a bit of a toss-up right now.
Y'all could do a Dear Diary for Nova, right?
Oh, we could. That is also going to be coming up very close. I need to put more paint on these models that I'm staring at right now that have been giving me the side eye this whole time. We have our recurring segment. We have a Flavitex quiz. I have this one ready. Davey helped pick this as well, so he is here with us in spirit, but I will present the quiz.
I'm not ready.
Ready?
I had to dunk Spinefin into a lethal earlier,
Oh,
so
okay.
so I could speak analytically, and now I'm without my comfort Spinefin.
Well, yeah. we don't have time to transition. The quiz is now. Pop quiz time.
Oh boy.
So this is. I'll give you a few hints before this actually starts. This is an older one, still legal in the current rotation though, so it is within playable deck, and this one is attributed to a fighter. The fighter it is attributed to Enric Ironhail from the Dwarves. So this is Addendum 1. First, get your foot in the door.
This is a card from Daring Delvers or Fearsome Fortress. I think it's Daring Delvers, actually.
You're getting warmer.
And it's a
take your positions.
It's a gambit.
I don't think Take Your Positions is in Daring Delvers.
So, I can see it. He's standing there with his Gatling gun, pointing forward.
Wow, you are 100% correct. That is the art. Just get the name.
I think this is one of those like
hold positions.
Can't be.
You're so close, Brian. You don't even know.
Because it's not hold your position. It's oh man.
Where are we in the meta right now? I'll give you another hint now.
Ooh okay.
How are we in the meta? That's a hint for the name of the card.
I feel like that's gonna be a very clever hint. Once I know the name.
I feel like a holding pattern, but
holding pattern, holding position, holding.
You're so close. Any more guesses, or should I let you know?
Put me out of my misery.
It is solid position. Because we are in a solid position.
Yeah.
What does that card do? Do you know?
It is the one where friendly fighters in enemy territory can't be pushed.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
And you had the art completely correct. You knew exactly what card it was. You just didn't get the name. So I will give you half credit. For the recommended listening for this episode, we also have this from Davey. It is Feel by Kendrick Lamar. For What the Hex, I've been Phil.
And I've been Skyler.
I've been Brian.